There are cracks people mistake for the end, but sometimes it's through those very fractures that light begins to shine through. This is the story of Melissa Hall, a painter from Seattle who once had everything, then lost it all, because of one truth. A journey through betrayal, loneliness, forgiveness, and finally, rebirth. A story not only about love, but about how a person learns to trust again, to love again, and to become themselves once more after everything falls apart. If you believe that light always finds its way even through the wounds, then stay and listen to this story, The House That Love Built. Hit like, subscribe, and join me through 10 chapters of this journey, where each part is a breath, a rainfall, and one more time the light returns. Seattle in the rainy season felt like a woman trying to hide her tears, quiet, but cold and unrelenting. That night, Melissa Hall sat alone in her wooden villa on the slope, overlooking Lake Union. The house was too still, with only the soft tapping of rain against the glass window. She rested her chin on her hand, staring at the unfinished canvas. The pale blue she'd planned to lighten with white now sat untouched. Something inside her refused to paint. Max Holt, her husband, had said he was at a company charity gala downtown, but his phone had been off for 4 hours. Melissa didn't call. She had never been the jealous type. She observed quietly, carefully, as if studying a painting where one color felt wrong, yet she still tried to understand why the artist had chosen it. Max's office was on the first floor, the place he often stayed late making client calls. Since their wedding, Melissa had never entered that room when he was away, not because he forbade it, but because she respected his space. But that night, something drew her down, a strange pull, faint, cold, but undeniable. Barefoot, she descended the stairs, the chill of the wooden floor biting her skin. The office door was slightly ajar. A warm yellow glow from the desk lamp spilled into the hallway. The desk inside was unnaturally neat, almost sterile. Melissa took a slow breath and stepped closer. Her eyes stopped at the small right-hand drawer, a silver lock gleaming in the light. Sturdy, but not large. She had never seen Max use that key. Glancing toward the pen tray on the shelf, she spotted an old key lying there. Maybe he'd forgotten it. Just one slight turn, she knew, and her life would never be the same again. She turned it. A soft click. The drawer opened. Inside were several envelopes, a Mont Blanc pen case, and a thin stack of photographs. Not work documents, not files. Each photo was printed with care, the kind of care someone gives to something they've touched, cherished, and hidden away with affection. Melissa pulled out the first one, and the world stopped. Max in a white shirt, that smile, those eyes holding another woman on a yacht's deck. She was younger, with dark blonde hair and a blue silk dress. Wind tangled their hair. The ocean stretched endlessly behind them. The perfect picture of happiness, except it wasn't her. Melissa turned to the next photo. The same pair, sitting close, wine glasses in hand, sunlight glinting off the glass, their faces inches apart. On the yacht's rail, the words Jameson Dream gleamed in the Sunday. She set the photos on the desk. Her heart pounded, but strangely, there were no tears. Only silence, thick and consuming, swallowing every sound in the room. Part of her wanted to run, to smash the wedding frame in the living room. But another part, the part that had learned to see the world through color and composition, stood still, observing, analyzing, feeling. Melissa took out her phone and typed the name, Jameson Dream Yacht, Seattle. The search result appeared: a private yacht belonging to architect Kyle Jameson, once featured in Architectural Digest for designs that celebrate natural light and structural honesty. She clicked on his wife's name. Kiki Horton Jameson, a social activist and former model, often seen at art events. On Kiki's Instagram, there was a photo taken on that same yacht, the same blue dress, the same day, just a different angle. The cold glow of the screen reflected on Melissa's face, still, expressionless, statue-like. An hour passed. She didn't cry. She didn't sigh. Outside, the rain kept falling. The clock ticked quietly toward midnight. When Max came home, his coat carried a trace of someone else's perfume. He smiled as if nothing had happened, kissed her cheek, and said casually, "I'm tired. You go to bed first." Melissa nodded softly. "All right. Sleep well." Then, he turned away, afraid he might see the storm rising in her eyes. That night, when Max slept, she returned to her easel. The soft blue from earlier had darkened. She picked up her brush, swept black paint across the center, then blended in faint strokes of white light breaking through shattered glass. One thought filled her mind. You betrayed me with lies. I'll answer you with the truth. And truth, she knew, was something no one could hide from forever. Morning came. Seattle still wore its gray veil. Mist blurred the lake, turning the city into a monochrome watercolor. Melissa sat by the window, sipping bitter coffee, listening to the weather forecast on the radio. The rain will continue through the weekend. She smiled faintly. Perfect. In her mind, a plan began to take shape. Not to destroy, but to expose. Max hated chaos. He feared losing control. So she would make him face the truth in the quietest, most controlled way possible through her calm. She opened her laptop and began to type. Subject: Studio Design Consultation. Dear Mr. Jameson, I was introduced to your work through an article about designs that honor natural light. I'm interested in building a glass painting studio at my home in Seattle. I'd love to meet and discuss ideas, if you're available. Sincerely, Melissa Hall. She read it over once, then clicked send. A single message and her life began to shift. 2 days later, Kyle Jameson replied, It would be my pleasure, Miss Hall. I'll be in Seattle this Friday. Thank you for your trust. That word trust made her smirk faintly, but she knew. Only the genuine can expose the false. Friday morning, a silver SUV pulled up to her gate. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, in a long coat. Not flashy like Max, grounded, composed. His handshake was warm, his eyes steady, the eyes of someone with nothing to hide. For a moment, she almost faltered. You'd like a glass studio? He asked. Yes. I want the light to come through but not burn. Kyle nodded, as if he understood something more profound than her words. I like the way you put that. They walked through the hallway. She showed him the back garden, where a crimson maple stood. Kyle opened his sketchbook and asked a few quiet questions. He didn't ask about the budget, only about how she wanted to feel inside that room. Peaceful, she said, and honest, he added. Melissa looked up. Did you say honest? Because light doesn't lie. Kyle replied with a gentle smile. His words stayed with her. They talked for hours about art, architecture, and small, human things. He told her about his 2 kids, and the shelters he designed for people who'd lost their homes after storms. For the first time, she shared her own belief, fragile now but once fierce. I used to think love was enough. No, Kyle said quietly. Only truth makes it last. When their meeting ended, the rain had stopped. He left, and she stood at the window watching him go, something stirring inside her. Not affection, not yet. Awareness. To expose a liar, one needs the help of someone who tells the truth. That night, she opened the photo stack again, Max's smiling face staring back, then glanced at the memory of Kyle's steady gaze from that morning. 2 worlds, one false, one real. And she knew her plan had begun to take form. She opened her sketchbook and wrote the title for a new drawing. A room where light hides nothing. Below it, she drew a wide-open window, a woman standing before it, brush in hand, a blank canvas behind her. Title: The Beginning of the Truth. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside Melissa, a new storm had begun. Seattle entered February wrapped in endless rain. The cold wasn't sharp enough to freeze, but just enough to make people shrink into themselves as if trying to hide from their own feelings. The Holt residence began to fill with new sounds, the pounding of hammers, the rasp of wood, the rustle of sketches. The glass studio project had officially begun. Kyle Jameson arrived every Monday and Thursday, always on time. He brought blueprints, measuring tools, and a hot cup of coffee. Melissa greeted him at the door, usually in a grey knit cardigan, her hair tied neatly behind her head. Between them was a polite distance, professional, but thin enough to sense something fragile beneath it. What kind of glass would you like to use? Kyle asked, pencil in hand. The kind that lets the light through, but doesn't glare, she replied. That's the most expensive kind. Money isn't the issue. Then what is? She met his gaze. The truth. Kyle looked up. For a brief moment, their eyes met, quiet, deep, human. He nodded with a faint smile. I understand. That day's session lasted longer than usual. As dusk fell, Kyle packed his papers while Melissa stood by the window, watching the rain-soaked garden. Do you think light has a personality? She asked softly. Personality, he repeated, Surprised. Yes. To me, every kind of light has its own emotion. Summer light is indulgent, but winter light it's honest. He smiled. I've never thought about it that way, but you're right. Winter light doesn't make people look better. It just shows who they really are. Melissa turned to him, a faint smile brushing her lips, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt: peace. Not anger, not defiance, not the need to appear strong, just peace, the kind that comes from being seen. She thought of Max. He had once made her feel like a perfect painting hung in a living room, admired, but never truly touched. With Kyle, she felt like a brushstroke, imperfect, raw, but honest. The next day, Max flew to New York. He didn't say why, only that it was for an important meeting. Melissa didn't ask. Since the night she found the photographs, she had become an expert at concealing her emotions. She spent the day with Kyle at the site, choosing wood tones, light angles, and window frames. Every minor detail she cared for, as if each line, each color, was part of something bigger, a design meant to lead Max straight to the truth he could no longer escape. That afternoon, they sat beneath the awning, rain drizzling softly around them. Kyle opened his lunchbox and offered her a sandwich. "You didn't have lunch?" "I forgot. You remind me of how I used to be working just to forget. And now? Now I work to remember. Every building I design is a reminder that even what's broken can stand again." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like a philosophy." "No," he said. "Just the lesson of a man who's lost everything once." Melissa said nothing, but in his eyes, she saw pain worn smooth like riverstones polished by time. That evening, after Kyle left, she stood alone in the half-built studio. On the damp cement floor, slivers of light refracted through temporary glass panels, shimmering like breath. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. In her mind, she could still hear Max's laugh, the clink of wine glasses, and his words, "You just paint. I'll handle everything else." Now, everything else meant lies. She unlocked her phone and opened the old photos. Max and Kiki smiling, radiant. But this time, she felt nothing. Maybe pain, too, has a limit, and once crossed, all that's left is stillness. She opened a new email and typed, "Subject, Invitation, Fractures Exhibition. Dear Mr. Jameson, thank you for today. I want to invite you to my art exhibition next week, titled Fractures. You might find something interesting there. Melissa." She hit send. One small message, but it would be the next piece in her plan. A plan to let every lie crack open on its own, without her needing to lift a hand. Friday morning brought rare sunlight to Seattle. The city glistened, glass towers throwing light across the wet streets. The Fractures exhibition was held at Maggie Chen's gallery, Melissa's closest friend. The space was white and still, with large glass panels standing among the paintings. The title alone drew curiosity. When Maggie asked, Melissa only said, "Every fracture tells a story. This one's mine." By 5 o'clock, guests began to arrive. Max was their black suit, perfect smile, hand resting on her back for the cameras. "You chose such a sad theme," he said. "Because sadness is honest," she replied, calm as a breeze. He chuckled, missing the weight beneath her words. Moments later, Kyle arrived in a light blue shirt, grey coat, and a rolled-up set of plans in hand. His eyes scanned the room and found her instantly. She smiled, nodding slightly. Their eyes met, and Max noticed. Just one glance and Melissa knew. The cracks had begun. Then, another figure entered. Kiki Jameson, radiant in an emerald silk dress, her golden hair glinting under the lights. Heads turned as she walked in. Melissa saw her and felt no surprise. She had planned this. She had sent the invitation herself. When Kiki moved toward Max, everything unfolded just as Melissa had imagined. She couldn't hear their words, only saw their smiles, polite, strained, and that familiar closeness. She watched from afar, detached, like a viewer rewatching a scene from a film she already knew by heart. Maggie whispered beside her, "You know her?" "Yes. She's the wife of the architect I hired." Maggie blinked. "You're kidding." "No. Life doesn't run out of irony." When the exhibition began, Melissa stepped forward to speak. Her voice was low and steady, each word floating softly through the silence. "Fractures. We all carry cracks, no matter how well we hide them. But I believe only when light passes through them do we truly see ourselves." The room fell silent. The lights dimmed, leaving only soft beams that reflected through fractured glass, casting mirrored faces across the crowd. As she stepped down, Kyle approached her quietly. "You paint with your heart, not your hands," he said. "And you build with faith," she answered. He looked as if he wanted to say more, but stopped himself. Across the room, Max and Kiki were still talking, laughing gently. Melissa glanced their way, tilted her head slightly, and smiled. "Mr. Jameson," she said, "this weekend, I'd like to invite you and your family to Lake Chelan. I'd love your thoughts on the light there. And I think some others should come too." Kyle hesitated. "Including my wife?" "Yes. Her too. I believe the light by the lake will reveal things very clearly." He nodded, unsure of her meaning, but he sensed something beneath her calm, something like the stillness before a storm. When the exhibition ended, Max drove her home. "On the way," he said, "you invited the Jamesons. That's unexpected. I find them interesting. Who are you introducing them to?" "To you." "What's that supposed to mean?" She turned her head slightly, the streetlights gliding across her face. "You'll see." Max frowned but said nothing more. Melissa leaned her head against the car window, watching the blurred lights streak past. Light always finds a way, she thought, even when people try to hide it behind the dark. Next week, at Lake Chelan, that light would shatter everything. And when it did, nothing would be hidden again. The road to Lake Chelan wound along the mountainside, grey cliffs on one side, the deep blue lake on the other. The water was so still that it mirrored the entire sky. Melissa gazed through the car window, watching spring light scatter across the surface like shards of glass. She breathed in deeply, the cold air brushing her chest, a mix of fear and calm. She, Max, Kyle, and Kiki, 4 people, 4 tangled hearts, were heading toward a house by the lake. That house had once been a summer retreat for her, and Max filled with laughter, plans, and dreams of children they never had. Now, it would be the stage for the quiet confrontation Melissa had been preparing for months. Max drove, his wedding ring gleaming faintly on the wheel. He played soft jazz, its rhythm steady as if to mask the tension in the air. "I still don't understand why you insisted on inviting the Jamesons," he said lightly, suspicion tucked behind his tone. "I need their input for the glass studio." "Both of them? I think light needs more than one perspective." Max gave a short, dry laugh but said nothing. He still believed Melissa was the obedient wife, the woman who would never step out of his control. That was his greatest mistake. When they arrived, the cabin stood quietly among the pines, facing the lake's silver water glinting under the fading Sunday. Kyle and Kiki were already there. He wore a white shirt and jeans, simple, grounded. Kiki, flawless as always, in a blush silk dress and oversized sunglasses, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt path. "Melissa," Kiki beamed, hugging her like an old friend. "This place is gorgeous. Thank you. It used to be a place I loved." Kiki didn't catch the chill beneath those words. She kept praising the house, her laughter echoing too bright. Kyle shook Max's hand, their exchange polite but heavy with undercurrents. "You're in real estate, right?" Kyle asked. "Yes. And you're the architect. I've seen some of your work. Impressive." "Thanks." Their words were civil, but the air between them pulsed tight, electric. Dinner was ready: roasted salmon, fresh greens, handmade bread, and red wine. Candlelight flickered across the glassware. The 4 of them sat around the table, smiles rehearsed, conversation harmless on the surface. Melissa watched every detail. Max tried to appear relaxed, but his gaze kept drifting toward Kiki, quick, almost invisible, but not to her. Kyle noticed too. He said nothing. Only Kiki kept talking, laughing, as though silence itself might break her. When dessert arrived, Melissa set her wineglass down and said softly, "I have a little story to tell." Max arched a brow. "Another idea for your paintings?" "Maybe. But this one's more real than any painting I've ever made." The air stilled. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, like someone breathing nearby. Melissa reached into her bag and placed a small envelope on the table. "Inside," she said, "is the story of the 4 of us." Kiki laughed, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" "It's strange, I know," Melissa said calmly, "but truth often is." She opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph. Candlelight reflected off it Max and Kiki on the yacht, wrapped in each other's arms. No one spoke. Only the faint tremor of wine rippled in the glasses. Max's face went pale. Kiki froze, her breath hitching. Kyle stared at the photo, then turned to his wife. His voice cracked. "How long?" Kiki said nothing. Only Melissa's whisper filled the silence. 2 years, since your first yacht trip. That day I still believed in marriage. No one moved. Then Kiki broke down, shaking, sobbing. Max shot to his feet, his voice sharp. "What the hell is this?" "I'm just telling the truth," she replied. "You went through my things? You're insane." "Maybe. But people only go insane when they love too much, don't they?" The words cut like glass. Kyle stood abruptly and walked out onto the porch. Kiki started to follow, but he raised a hand. "Don't," he said quietly. "I need air." He stepped outside, leaving the door ajar behind him. Inside, Max faced Melissa. "What do you want?" "Nothing. Just for you to look at what you've done. You're trying to destroy me." "No, you did that yourself." Max's hands tightened into fists. In the candlelight, his face twisted with rage. But Melissa felt no fear. She met his eyes calm, unwavering. "You can go," she said, "but take the photo with you, so you don't forget the face you wear when truth hits you." He said nothing more. He grabbed his coat and slammed the door behind him. The table shook. A glass toppled, shattered, red wine spilling like blood across the wood. Only Melissa and Kiki remained, one silent, one in tears. Outside, cold wind swept across the porch. Kyle leaned on the railing, staring out at the black water. Melissa stepped out, wrapping her sweater tight around her shoulders. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I don't know whether to thank you or blame you. Do whichever makes it easier to breathe. You know what I'll lose from this?" "Yes, the same thing I did." After a long pause, he turned to her. Their eyes met, no longer curious, but understanding. Two betrayed souls, standing in the dark, lit only by the fragile glow of honesty. Melissa spoke quietly. "Do you think people can rebuild after everything falls apart?" Kyle smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Yes, it just won't be the same. But sometimes, different is better." She nodded. Inside, Kiki still wept. Outside, the wind whispered, and the lake lay silent. That night, every lie shattered like glass, and through every shard, truth finally gleamed. Morning came, grey light seeping into the quiet house. No laughter, no music, only the smell of burnt wood and old wine. Melissa sat by the window, coffee cupped in her hands. She heard an engine start, Max leaving early. Across the lake, Kiki's car disappeared into the mist. Only she and Kyle remained. They quietly gathered what was left: broken glasses, damp napkins, fallen flowers. No words, just silence, not awkward, but understood. "Do you regret it?" Kyle finally asked, voice rough. "No. Do you?" "I don't know. I feel empty." "Emptiness is a good beginning," she said, smiling faintly. He looked at her eyes, tired, but grateful. "You know," he said, "my wife lied so well I believed she was happy, and I thought silence would keep everything together." "Silence keeps nothing," Melissa said. "It only delays the truth. You know that better than I do." They both laughed softly, a fragile, weary sound echoing through the hollow house, like two souls gently colliding in their exhaustion. That afternoon, they left Lake Chelan, each driving in a different direction. On the road home, Melissa drove alone, the lake shrinking in her rearview mirror. Her chest felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because it had finally taken on a shape. Truth, however cruel, was still the only form of freedom. She didn't know what came next, whether Max would seek revenge, or if the world would believe his version. But for now, she wasn't afraid. She had already survived the worst. When she returned to Seattle, rain had begun again. She unlocked the door. The scent of fresh paint filled the air. The glass studio was nearly finished. She stepped inside, standing still beneath the vast window. Light streamed through, painting fine white lines across the wooden floor. She lifted her hand, letting the light touch her fingers, as if touching something finally real. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kyle. "Thank you for telling the truth. It hurts, but it woke me up. I wish you peace." She smiled faintly. Yes, in the end, peace was what they were both chasing. She set her phone down, opened the window, and took a deep breath. The rain was falling soft and steady. But this time, she didn't feel cold, because somewhere beyond the rain, she knew light was waiting. That night, after everyone had gone, the lake house sank into silence. A gentle wind from the water slipped through the porch, stirring the white curtains. On the dining table, a spilled glass of wine left a stain on the cloth like a wound that hadn't yet dried. Melissa sat in the living room, the firelight flickering across her face. She didn't cry. She didn't feel triumphant. Just empty, vast, cold, and exhausted. A soft sound came from the door. Kyle stepped in, mud on his shoes. He had been walking along the lake, quiet for hours. "You're still awake?" "I am. You too. Can't sleep. Too many voices in my head." He sank into the chair across from her, staring down at his hands. After a moment, he spoke, more to himself than to her. "I knew our marriage wasn't perfect, but I didn't think she'd go that far." Melissa watched the flames and said softly, "No one ever believes the person they love could betray them, until they do. And you? How do you feel after saying it all? Like I just painted a picture with my own blood." Kyle was silent. He understood. Outside, the wind grew stronger. Rain began to fall. The lake turned dark and restless. He stood and walked to the window, looking out into the black distance. "Are you going back to him?" he asked. "No. What about us? Do you think we're on the same side?" The question made her pause. "We're on the side of truth," she said quietly. "Not of love." He gave a sad smile. "Sometimes those two are harder to separate than we think." The next morning, Max returned. The door flew open. His footsteps echoed loudly on the floor. His face was tight, his eyes burning with anger. "You did something foolish, Melissa." "Maybe," she said evenly, "but at least I didn't lie. Do you have any idea what you've ruined? My reputation, my company, this family." "This family," she interrupted, calm and cold. "You still think it exists?" Max stepped closer, his breath sharp. "What do you want?" "I want freedom." "You won't have it." The words thickened the air. For the first time, Melissa saw him clearly, not the man who once kissed her forehead every morning, but the man who had to control everything, who believed even she belonged to him. She took a step back, eyes steady. "You're wrong, Max. I already have it. The moment I opened that drawer, I was free." He narrowed his eyes, voice dropping low. "Be careful what you wish for. When you lose everything, don't blame anyone but yourself." Then he turned and slammed the door so hard the frame shuddered. Melissa stood still, listening to the car fade down the road. She felt no fear now, only emptiness, and a strange, light calm. "Kyle left that afternoon. I need to see my kids," he said. She nodded. "I understand." On the porch, he turned back. "Thank you, Melissa. Not for exposing her, but for doing what I couldn't." "What's that?" "Telling the truth." Then he walked away. Melissa watched his figure disappear down the path until only the soft rhythm of the lake remained. She knew none of them would ever be the same again. The days that followed were filled with silence. The media began buzzing with stories scandal among Seattle's art and business elites. Old photos of Max and Kiki resurfaced, edited, twisted, and embellished. To the public, Melissa became the tragic but dangerous wife. Maggie called, her voice trembling. "You should leave the city for a while." "It's okay. I need to face this." "Face what?" "Myself. Otherwise, all of this was just cheap revenge." She stayed home, spending her days in the glass studio now that it was finally complete. In the mornings, sunlight poured through the panels, warm against the wooden floor. She painted not cracks anymore, but light. Each brushstroke was a breath. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Kyle standing there. He looked tired, unshaven, with dark circles beneath his eyes. "I came to apologize." "For what?" "For walking out that night. For not being brave enough to stay." "You don't need to apologize," she said softly. "We're all just learning how to breathe again." He smiled, eyes softening. "Would you like to get out for a bit? I know a small cafe overlooking the bay." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." The cafe sat on a quiet slope on Capitol Hill, warm and fragrant with the aroma of roasted coffee. They took a table by the window, watching rain trail down the glass. "My son won't talk to me," Kyle said quietly. "He thinks it's all my fault. Have you tried explaining?" "I did. But he's 11. To him, the one who speaks louder is always right." Melissa said nothing. She understood that kind of pain, the helplessness of watching people believe the liar because the liar tells the prettier story. "What will you do?" "I don't know. Maybe start over." "How?" "By building something real." She looked at him, and a thought passed through her mind. Maybe they were both rebuilding something too. Not a house, but trust. When they parted at the parking lot, the rain had stopped. Kyle said, "If you ever need help with the glass room, I can come by. The afternoon light might be too harsh. Please do. Light always needs someone who understands it." They both smiled, then fell into a comfortable silence. For a moment, Seattle didn't feel so cold. That night, back home, Melissa opened the window. The rain had ended, leaving only the scent of wet earth. She looked out at the garden, the glow from the glass studio reflecting on a small puddle near the porch. For the first time in months, she felt peace, a kind no one could take away. And in her mind, a quiet thought formed. Every lie will collapse when the light is strong enough. And when it does, don't be afraid, because behind the ruins, there's always space to begin again. After the storm passed, the city grew strangely quiet. Late April in Seattle carried a pale kind of light, like it had been filtered through thick glass, clear but cold. The rain still fell, soft and persistent, but no longer loud. Just like Melissa Hall's life after the scandal, no one spoke of it openly, but everyone looked. News about Max Holt and his affair spread across every business site. In each article, he stood beside a blonde woman, smiling confidently, the caption beneath reading, "Real estate heir linked to affair with famed architect's wife." No names were needed. Everyone knew. Melissa read it one Sunday morning. She didn't feel shock or sorrow, just fatigue, like someone watching their own life dissected from afar. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, friends, even strangers. Maggie called, urging her to get offline, to fly to California for a while. Melissa smiled. "No need. I'm fine. I'm not running." "Melissa, they're saying you're crazy, that you orchestrated all this to ruin your husband." "Maybe. But at least they're telling the truth about one thing. I'm not silent anymore." That morning, she sat by the window, looking through freshly cleaned glass. Sunlight poured in warmer than usual. On the easel stood an unfinished painting titled "The Morning After." She picked up her brush, mixed a deep blue, and drew it across the center where the light broke through the darkness. The painting wasn't beautiful, but it was true, and truth, she realized, mattered more than beauty. Then the doorbell rang. Kyle stood there, soaked in rain, holding a paper bag of coffee. "I brought this in exchange for a little silence." "Silence is worth more than coffee," she laughed. He stepped inside, glancing around. The house looked less empty now, but still fragile like its owner. "You're still painting?" "Because it's the only way I know how to keep from falling apart." "I'm drawing too," he said. "Not for clients this time, for myself." "What are you building?" "A house. Small, just big enough for two." Melissa smiled faintly, sadness flickering in her eyes. "Have you found the second person yet?" "Not yet," he replied. "But I think she's somewhere in this city, learning how to live again." In that quiet moment, with rain outside and coffee steaming between them, two broken souls sat facing each other. They didn't need words. They understood. Days passed slowly, but not heavily. Melissa spent her mornings painting and evenings walking through her neighborhood. Once, she stopped at a small bookstore and noticed a brown leather journal on the shelf, "The Art of Starting Over." She bought it, brought it home, and wrote on the first page, "Day 1. I'm still alive, and I'm learning not to hate what's behind me." She wrote every day, like speaking to herself. Sometimes only a line or two. "He's silent. So am I. But my silence breathes now." Or, "Kyle sent me a photo of his kids. They're smiling. It made my heart softer." A week later, a letter came from her lawyer. Divorce papers. No fights, no lawsuits. Max had agreed to her terms, which meant she kept almost nothing but the old house and her studio. She signed without hesitation. For many, that paper would be an ending. For her, it was a door opening. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the glass room, watching the rain. Droplets slid down the window, merging like her emotions, no longer divided between hurt and relief. She whispered to herself, "Everything breaks. But even what's broken can retake shape, if you're brave enough to face the pieces." May came quietly, like a song without lyrics. Seattle warmed. Sunlight returned, glowing against the damp streets. Melissa opened the studio windows, letting the breeze flow in, carrying the scent of wet grass and oil paint. She began retaking small commissions, not through galleries, but from people she knew. Maggie teased her, "You've become a symbol, the woman who dared to tell the truth." Melissa smiled. I'm just a woman with nothing left to lose. One afternoon, as she was mixing paint, her phone rang. Kyle's voice came through, soft and familiar. Are you free tonight? Where are you taking me? Nowhere far. I need to talk. I've got news. The old cafe hadn't changed. Warm wood, coffee roasting in the air. Kyle sat by the window, sunlight glinting off his dark hair. I just signed the separation papers, he said quietly. Kiki will stay with the kids for 6 months, then we'll alternate. Melissa nodded. That must have been hard. Yeah, but I'm glad. At least we don't have to pretend anymore. She smiled softly. Pretending kills love faster than betrayal ever could. You're right, he said, because it makes people forget how to tell the truth. They sat quietly for a while. Outside, the sun was fading, turning the table gold. Then Kyle said, I used to think I'd never trust anyone again. But then I met you. Don't trust me, Kyle, Melissa murmured. I've lied too, just once, but to reveal the truth. Sometimes, he said, the only way to tell the truth is to lie one last time. She looked at him for a long moment. In his eyes, she saw more than compassion. She saw understanding, the kind born only from falling apart and finding the ground again. They started seeing each other more often. No labels, no promises, just walks, coffee, and quiet company. Kyle helped adjust the studio roof to soften the afternoon light, he said. Melissa helped paint his new apartment, hanging small paintings on the walls. One night, as they stood by the window overlooking the city, he asked, Do you ever think maybe everything happened to lead us here? She smiled. I'm not brave enough to call it fate, but maybe it is. On her birthday, he showed up with a bouquet of sunflowers. Some are light, he said. I thought you could use some. She placed them in a vase, gazing at them for a long time. Then she whispered, Thank you, for coming, for not leaving. He looked at her, his voice low. No one leaves the place where they finally feel real. They didn't need to say more. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of paint and flowers. In a city that had witnessed so many lies, two broken people stood side by side, not promising forever, not pretending to be healed, but simply living, truthfully, together. That night, Melissa opened her leather journal and wrote, Day 137. I'm not afraid of the light anymore, because light doesn't burn, it only reveals what was already there. She closed the book, set it on the table, and looked toward the glass room. Her reflection glimmered against the window, imperfect, but whole. And for the first time in years, Melissa smiled in peace. Some mornings, Melissa woke to sunlight spilling through the glass studio, tinting everything with a soft golden hue. She stepped out onto the porch, brewed her coffee, and listened to the birds between the city sounds. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive, not merely existing, not forcing strength, but truly living, entirely in each breath. After the divorce, Max disappeared from Seattle. Rumor had it he'd moved to Miami to open a new branch. She didn't ask, nor did she search. Some people, once gone, were best left to fade into memory. As for Kiki, she heard that the woman had entered a rehab program in Portland. That update came from Kyle himself, through a brief message. She's trying to get better. Maybe in the end, we all need a chance to start over. Melissa replied, I'm glad, for her, and for you. Time passed. The Seattle rain softened, leaving behind pale skies. The glass studio became the heart of her new life. Melissa opened a small painting class for people who'd gone through loss, divorce, or found themselves lost. She didn't teach technique. She taught how to breathe with color. On the first day, she told her students, Don't try to paint beautifully. Paint honestly. Every brushstroke is a confession, and no one here will judge you. A timid middle-aged woman raised her hand. What if I don't know where to start? Then start where it hurts most, Melissa said with a smile. That afternoon, the studio was bathed in light. She stood among unfinished canvases, listening to quiet laughter mingling with sighs. For the first time, she felt useful, not just surviving her own pain, but helping others walk out of theirs. Kyle still came by regularly. No grand gestures, no rushing. He brought coffee every Monday, adjusted a window hinge here and there, then listened as she talked about her students and her new paintings. Do you know why I chose to teach? She asked once. Because you don't want others to drown the way you did. True, but also because teaching makes me articulate what I believe out loud. And saying it reminds me to remember. Remember what? That the light is still there even when I forget. He looked at her, his eyes warm and quietly proud. They both knew what they were rebuilding wasn't just a life, it was faith. Faith in people. Faith in love that could exist without fear. One early summer evening, they walked by Lake Union. The air was warm, the breeze soft. Small boats drifted across the water. Melissa strolled, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves. Beside her, Kyle kept his hands in his pockets, silent for a long while before admitting, "I'm still afraid, Melissa." "Of what?" "Of loving again." She gave a faint smile. "You think I'm not afraid? I'm terrified, because I know what love can destroy. But it's also the only thing that brings people back to life." Maybe. They stopped by the railing, looking at the city lights shimmering across the lake. "So what do we do with that fear?" he asked. "Love slowly," she said, "and tell the truth even when it hurts." Kyle nodded softly. Then he took her hand, not tightly, not as a promise, just enough to remind them both that they weren't alone anymore. By the time they got back, rain had begun to fall. Standing at her door, Melissa turned to him. "Do you want to come in? There's wine, music, and light." "And you?" She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, but I can't promise I'm not still scared." "Then let's be scared together," he said. They stepped inside. The glass room glowed softly. Melissa played an old jazz record. Kyle poured the wine. Among the scent of paint and warm light, two people who had once fallen apart sat side by side, quiet, breathing, and finally, they kissed, not to forget, but to remember that they were still alive. After that night, nothing changed dramatically, everything deepened, quietly. Kyle still lived in Portland, Melissa in Seattle. They met every weekend. Sometimes he came early, reading in the studio while she taught. Some nights, they said nothing at all, just listened to the rain, letting silence speak for them. Once, she asked, "If someday I paint about pain again, will that scare you?" He smiled. "No, because I know you won't let it consume you anymore." "I'm not so sure. Then I'll remind you." He took her hand, rough, warm, the hand of a builder. Melissa thought, maybe this is what love is now, someone who doesn't promise forever, but stays when it gets hard. When she was invited to exhibit in New York, her first major show since her divorce, the theme was foundations. Kyle insisted on going with her. "I want to see you step into the light," he said, literally. The gallery was a pure white space, illuminated by soft amber lights. Melissa's works hung at the center, abstract transitions from darkness to brightness. The final piece was titled Reconstruction. Visitors lingered in front of it for a long time. A journalist asked, "What's this painting about?" She answered without hesitation, "It's about rebuilding yourself from what's broken. Because if you throw it all away, you'll never know how strong you really are." When the show ended, Kyle took her hand under the flash of cameras. He leaned close and whispered, "I'm proud of you." She turned, smiling with her eyes. "I could have stood without you, but because of you, I learned how to stand still without fear." They flew back to Seattle on a late-night flight. Rain tapped softly on the windows as the plane descended. Melissa rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we're happy?" "Yes," he said. "Not the loud kind. More like a small flame, not bright, but lasting." She closed her eyes, whispering, "Then let's keep it." Time moved gently after that. Kyle relocated to Seattle, renting an apartment near her studio. He took on new projects, small ones, but all built on honesty. Melissa expanded her classes, opening sessions for children. "They paint with their hearts," she said, "not with fear." One evening, as the sun lowered, Kyle came to the studio and handed her a paper. "What's this?" she asked. "A building permit. For a new project?" "No, for you." "For me? I want to build a house, not big, not fancy. Just enough space for you to paint, for me to plant trees, and for the light to come through, without burning." She looked at the paper, then at him. Something bloomed quietly inside her, light, tender. She nodded. "Then build it. But slowly. He promised." That night, she opened her leather journal and wrote, "Day 214. I've learned that real love doesn't need forever. It only needs a little honesty each day and enough courage to stay." She set down the pen and looked out the window. Outside, the city still roared, but inside her small glass room, everything was still and shining, like a dream, finally healed. Autumn came to Seattle like a quiet breath. The maple tree in front of Melissa's house shifted from green to red, then to gold, shedding its leaves in slow, gentle waves. Inside the glass studio, the late afternoon light slanted through the panels, casting a warm, amber hue over the room. Life with Kyle had settled into a peaceful rhythm: morning coffee, work by day, quiet dinners, old jazz at night. No more storms, no more doubts about whether trust could exist again. Everything felt like a drying canvas, still, yet alive. Then one morning, just as Kyle was leaving for a meeting, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and froze. It was Kiki. Her voice trembled. "Kyle, I'm sorry, but I have to do this. I've filed a motion to revisit custody." He stopped walking, cold wind cutting through his coat. "What did you say?" "My lawyer thinks I have a chance. The kids need a stable environment. And you, Kiki," his voice dropped, hoarse, "you're hurting them." "No, I'm protecting them. I don't want them growing up with someone who can't stay faithful." That last sentence hit like a needle to the heart. He ended the call and stood there, staring at the grey sky, his breath shallow and frozen. When Melissa opened the door that afternoon and saw him soaked, eyes hollow, she understood immediately. He set down his bag and said quietly, "She's suing me." She didn't ask. She brewed tea and handed him a cup. They sat in silence, the rain tapping steadily against the glass roof. After a long pause, Kyle said, "Part of it's my fault. I lost patience. I didn't hold my family together the way I should have." "You held it long enough," she said gently. "She'll use everything, even us." Melissa met his eyes. There was no anger there, only soft exhaustion. "I know, but we have nothing to hide. Not this time." Days passed, and their names began to surface in the media again. No longer about infidelity now, it was custody battle between architect and former model. Melissa's name appeared too, always in parentheses, like a shadow. Maggie texted, "You should stay out of sight for a while." Melissa replied, "I'm not afraid anymore." Kyle met with lawyers, child psychologists, and mediators. Melissa didn't interfere. She cooked, made tea, stayed beside him. Sometimes he would stare at pictures of his sons on his phone. "Ethan's learning piano," he said softly one night. "Leo's keeping a journal. They still call me, but Kiki's starting to control even that." "Can you win?" she asked. "I don't know, but I won't stop trying." The first hearing was set for the end of the month. Melissa stayed home on her lawyer's advice. She spent the day in the glass room, painting, waiting. When Kyle came back that night, he said nothing at first. He removed his tie and sank into the chair. She reached for his hand but didn't speak. After a while, he whispered, "We lost." She squeezed his hand. Still no words. "She used a photo of us at the New York exhibition," he said, voice breaking. "Her lawyer claimed it proved I had an inappropriate relationship during separation." Melissa stayed quiet. He turned to her, eyes glassy. "I lost them, Melissa. I really lost them." In that bright, quiet room, they both fell silent. Then she said softly, "You didn't lose them. They're still here." She touched his chest. "Here." He lowered his head, tears falling onto her hand, not tears of defeat, but of someone finally letting go of what he couldn't fix. After that, the house grew quieter. Kyle spoke less, smiled less. Melissa still taught, still painted, still brewed coffee, but something hung heavy between them, like two people mourning something unnamed. One evening, as she cleaned her brushes, she heard his voice behind her. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For making you carry this with me." "I'm not carrying it," she said. "I chose to stay." He stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Do you ever think, maybe I've brought you too much trouble?" "No," she said. "I think we're both just learning how to live honestly." He said nothing more, just pulled her close, holding her as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. A few days later, Kyle received an email from Kiki. "Kyle, I know you hate me, but the kids need stability. I'm doing what is right. If you really want to talk, come here. Not to court, to the house." He read it over and over, then sat in silence for a long time. That afternoon, he drove to Portland. Melissa didn't go with him. Before leaving, he told her, "I don't know how this will go. Just tell the truth," she said. "Sometimes, truth changes people." The house in Portland looked the same: white walls, wilted vines. Kiki opened the door. She looked thinner, tired. On the table sat two framed photos, one of Kyle, one of the boys. "They miss you," she said. "I miss them too." She sat down, twisting her old wedding ring. "Are you happy? With her?" "Yes," he said quietly. "For the first time in years." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I hate to admit it, but maybe you deserve that." Then, in a trembling voice, she said, "I was wrong, Kyle. Not because I cheated, but because I lived like someone who only knew how to be loved, not how to love back." He didn't answer, just placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said, "for telling the truth." When Kyle returned to Seattle, Melissa was painting. He walked in silently and set a document on her table. "The court granted me visitation," he said. "Every weekend." Kiki agreed. "No appeals needed." "What did you say to her?" "Nothing. Just the truth." Melissa smiled softly. "See? Light can do what fighting never could." A week later, the boys came to Seattle. Ethan, 11, serious like his father. Leo, 8, curious, full of laughter. When they entered the glass room, Melissa froze for a moment. "So this is where you paint?" Leo asked. "Yes," she said. "Want to try?" He nodded. She handed him a brush and a pot of blue paint. "Paint anything you like." He painted a house with a glass roof, featuring 2 adults and 2 children. Kyle stood behind them, watching quietly. Melissa said softly, "See? You didn't lose anything. You're just building again from the ground up." She turned, and their eyes met, warm, steady, no longer shadowed by grief. In that look, she knew. Their love had crossed into something new. No longer the love of 2 broken people, but of 2 who dared to love despite the risk. That night, after the boys fell asleep, Kyle whispered beside her, "I used to think justice was the strongest thing, but now I know it's trust." Melissa smiled. "And I used to think only truth could save us. But no, it's love." They both laughed softly. Outside, Seattle rain began to fall again, gentle, not cold. The glass room glowed with warmth, holding 4 people who had all been broken once and were now learning, together, how to build a life out of something real. That winter, Seattle remained shrouded in a veil of fog for weeks. The light was so thin that even at noon, the world looked like dusk. Melissa had grown used to it, that pale, honest light that filtered through the glass and whispered, "No truth comes without leaving a scar." She and Kyle now lived together in a small house north of the city. His sons came every weekend. The living room always carried the smell of hot chocolate and laughter. Life was calm, measured, almost gentle. And yet, on quiet days when Kyle was out and the dim light lay across her desk, Melissa sometimes found herself thinking of Kiki, not the woman who'd hurt her, but another woman entirely. Lost, fragile, and once, like her, someone who had loved. One Friday afternoon, while Melissa was teaching, there was a knock at the door. Maggie answered, then turned, eyes uncertain. "Melissa, someone's here for you." Melissa looked up, brush in hand, and froze. Standing at the doorway was Kiki Jameson. She was thinner, her hair tied back, her face bare of makeup. When she saw Melissa, she smiled faintly, a trembling, human smile. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced," she said softly. "I just needed to talk." The air in the studio went still. Maggie glanced at Melissa, then quietly slipped out, leaving the 2 women alone. Kiki's gaze moved slowly around the room, coming to rest on the canvases. "I followed your last exhibition," she said, her voice rough. "You painted what I never dared to say." "They're not beautiful," Melissa replied. "They're just true. Truth always hurts. But lies hurt longer." Silence settled between them. Outside, the rain fell in an even rhythm so steady it seemed to sync with their breathing. Kiki sat down, fingers laced tightly together. "I didn't come to apologize," she said. "I know it wouldn't mean much now. I just wanted to ask, do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Telling the truth, breaking everything apart." Melissa looked at her for a long time. "If I could go back," she said slowly, "I'd still do it. But this time, I wouldn't do it in anger. I'd do it with compassion." Kiki bowed her head. Tears slipped down her cheeks and gathered in her hands. "Is he happy?" she asked. "He's at peace." Kiki nodded, voice breaking. "Then that's enough." They sat in silence for a while. When Kiki finally stood, her eyes wandered once more across the glass room, that faint light touching her face, softening it. "I understand now," she whispered. "You didn't take anything from me. You just picked up what I dropped." As she reached the door, Melissa called out, "Kiki." She turned. "Thank you for coming." Their eyes met one last time. No hatred, no rivalry. Just two women who had both broken over the same man, finally seeing the same fragility in each other. When the door closed, Melissa stayed where she was, a strange ache rising in her chest pain. Yes, but lighter somehow. That evening, when Kyle came home, she told him everything. He listened quietly, then said, "I knew she'd come one day. I didn't expect you to be this calm." "I wasn't calm," Melissa said. "I'm just tired of hating people." He took her hand, gently. "You know," he murmured, "forgiving is the bravest thing anyone who's been betrayed can do." She smiled faintly. No, forgiveness is just the only way not to stay chained to the past. That night, with the city drowned in rain, Melissa sat by her desk and opened her leather journal. Day 302. Today, I met the woman who once cost me everything. But when I looked at her, I didn't see hatred. I saw myself, the version of me that once needed to be held. She closed the journal and laughed softly to herself. Outside, the rain eased as if the sky was exhaling too. In the weeks that followed, Kiki disappeared from their lives. No calls, no messages, no news. Kyle later heard she had moved to rural Oregon to live with a group of organic gardeners. He told Melissa, maybe she finally found what the city couldn't give her. Melissa nodded. "Peace." "Yeah," he said. "Peace." After that meeting, Melissa's paintings underwent a change. No more fractures, no more dark tones. Her canvases turned white, silver-gray, translucent like glass. Maggie noticed, "You're changing your style." "No," Melissa smiled. "I'm just realizing light can be gentle, too." She titled the new series Mercy. Not mercy for others, but for herself. The part of her that had once been weak, naive, and believed love had to be perfect. The exhibition took place in a small riverside gallery, quiet, with white walls and a faint piano in the background. When Kyle arrived, he stopped before the most significant piece, Glass and Mercy. On the canvas stood nothing but a transparent prism, reflecting the faint outline of a woman bowed forward, her face unseen, surrounded by light as soft as breath. He turned to her and asked, "You really forgave her, didn't you?" "No," she said. "I forgave myself." He looked at her, pride and tenderness mingling in his eyes. "You know, Melissa," he whispered, "some wounds only heal when you dare to face them. And you've done it so beautifully. I don't even know what to say." She smiled. "I don't know either. Maybe I just got tired of carrying the weight." They stood side by side, watching the light reflect off the walls, two pieces of glass finally fitting together. Later, they walked home across the bridge. The wind was cold, mist rising from the river below. Kyle draped his arm around her shoulders. "What do you think the price of truth is?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Loneliness," he said, "but also freedom." She nodded, eyes distant. "I used to think truth would make me lose everything. Now I see it gave me back myself." That night, in their small house, Kyle read while Melissa painted. Warm light filled the room, the sound of brush against canvas steady as a heartbeat. Her final piece in the Mercy series was titled Light After Truth. When she laid down her brush, Kyle came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her. "Finished?" "Yes." "How do you feel?" "Light." "Me too." They both looked at the painting light streaming through a thin layer of glass, forming a soft white halo. No figures, no shadows, only pure light, like the quiet promise of forgiveness. When they turned off the lamp, the room sank into silence. Outside, rain still fell, but not like before. It didn't chill. It simply made everything more real, a soft background music to the peace they had paid so dearly to earn. March arrived in Seattle with sharp winds and relentless rain. The sky was an ashen gray. The air was so cold that it felt like glass against the skin. Gusts from the bay rattled the windows of their small house, making the glass hum softly. That morning, Melissa woke early. She brewed coffee, inhaling the warmth as it spread through the kitchen. Kyle was still asleep, his arm resting loosely over his chest, his breath calm and even. She watched him and smiled peace, a word she'd finally learned to believe in. She sat at her desk and opened her journal. Day 401. Peace is when you no longer need to run from your past, and no longer fear what's ahead. Just as she set the pen down, her phone buzzed violently on the table. The screen lit up Kiki. Her heart tightened, instinctively. She hesitated a moment, then answered. The voice on the other end was frantic, broken by sobs. "Melissa, It's Ethan. He collapsed. His heart stopped. We're at Portland General. Please tell Kyle. Hurry. The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. All she could hear after that was the wind howling through the window, and then silence. 3 hours later, they were at the hospital. White hallways, the sting of disinfectant, the endless hum of machines. Kiki sat slumped on a chair, pale and trembling. When she saw them, she rose, tears flooding her face. He's in surgery. They said his heart stopped for 5 minutes before they got it back. Kyle rushed forward, his world narrowing to the sound of blood pounding in his ears. Melissa followed, gripping his hand tightly. Outside the operating room, a red light glowed. A doctor babbled quietly. We're doing everything we can. It'll be a long procedure, at least 6 hours. Kiki collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Kyle stood motionless, eyes fixed on the door. Melissa sat down beside Kiki and silently handed her a tissue. For the first time in years, the two women sat side by side, waiting and praying for the same small heartbeat. Time in the hospital didn't pass by the clock, but by the rhythm of breathing and machines. 4 hours, 5, 6. Finally, the surgery light flicked off. The doctor stepped out, voice rough with fatigue. We restored cardiac rhythm. He's stable for now, but still unconscious. The next 24 hours are critical. Kiki buried her face in her hands. It's my fault, she cried. I looked away for 1 second. I was on the phone, he was playing, and then he just... Kyle didn't speak. He just held her as she wept. Melissa stood a few feet away, watching them. Strangely, she felt no jealousy, no anger, only compassion. Before her wasn't the ex-wife, but a terrified mother. She walked over quietly. Kiki, listen to me, she said softly. Ethan's strong. He'll make it. Kiki looked up, eyes red. You really think so? Yes. I've seen him laugh. I've seen him paint. A child with that much light in his eyes doesn't fade easily. Kiki broke down again, but this time not from despair, from relief that someone still believed in her. That night, all three stayed at the hospital. Kyle sat by Ethan's bed, holding his son's small hand, whispering over and over, "You've got to wake up, buddy. I still haven't taught you how to fly a kite." Kiki sat in the corner, eyes fixed on the monitors. Melissa stood outside the glass, one hand pressed to her chest. She'd never been one to pray, but that night, she whispered to no one in particular, "Please let him live. Not just for them, but for all of us, for everyone who's ever failed and is still trying to make it right." Rain beat against the windows, and the wind howled. Streetlights flickered through the storm, casting pale light over the boy's still face, faint, but alive. And in that faint breath, there was still hope. Morning came grey and thin. The first light slipped through the blinds of the hospital room. Ethan hadn't woken yet, but his pulse was steady. The doctor smiled faintly. He's responding well. If there are no complications, he could wake within hours. The three adults exhaled at once, like souls returning to their bodies. Kiki wept again. Kyle bent his head, and Melissa stood still, tears falling silently, not sure for whom she cried. Later, while Kyle was with the doctor, Kiki turned to Melissa. Her voice was quiet, raw. "You know, I used to hate you so much it hurt to breathe. Every time I saw you, I thought you'd stolen my life." Melissa said nothing. "But now," Kiki's eyes glistened, "now I just feel grateful. You saved him, maybe not directly, but you kept him from becoming someone I couldn't recognize. If you hadn't, I'd have lost him forever, not to love, but to hate." There was a long silence. Then Kiki reached for Melissa's hand for the first time, willingly. "If Ethan wakes up," she whispered, "I'll drop the custody case. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm so tired." Melissa squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you. Not for Kyle, for yourself." By evening, Ethan opened his eyes. His voice was weak but clear. "Mom? Dad?" Kyle broke down. Kiki pressed her face to the bed, sobbing. Then Ethan turned slightly, toward the window toward Melissa, and whispered, "Miss Melissa." They all froze. "I saw you," he said faintly. "In a dream. You told me to come back, that everyone was waiting." No one spoke, but in that small hospital room, something unseen seemed to shine soft, warm, and impossibly kind. Days later, Ethan was discharged. Kiki kept her promise. She withdrew her custody petition. "We'll raise them together," she said, "as friends. Okay?" Kyle nodded. Melissa stood beside him, smiling quietly. And in that moment, she realized this was what actual growth looked like, choosing peace over victory. That evening, back home, the glass room glowed gold as always, but the light felt different, deeper, as if it had just witnessed a miracle. They sat together, listening to the rain. After a while, Kyle murmured, "Maybe God lets people get lost so they can learn their way home. Today, I think we all found our way back." Melissa leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yes, maybe forgiveness is the only road that leads home." That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "Day 419. The boy woke up, and when he smiled, I understood. Life itself is the most evident proof of love. Not in what we say, but in what we choose to hold on to, even after we've hurt each other." She closed the book and looked through the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was still dark, but beyond the clouds, the first light of dawn was breaking, and with it, the beginning of another chapter of love. Summer arrived in Seattle, radiant and clear. For the first time in years, the rain stopped for 3 straight weeks. The streets shimmered in green. The air smelled of new wood and morning coffee drifting through narrow lanes. Melissa stepped onto the porch, cup of tea in hand, watching sunlight pour over the lake. She still remembered the first day she came here, the old house, with dark wood, cold glass walls, and a heart cracked open. Now, everything had changed. Across the field, Kyle was framing the walls of their new house. Sweat glistened on his neck, but he was smiling, sunlight glinting off his tan skin. Ethan and Leo were racing around piles of timber, their laughter echoing. Sometimes Kiki dropped by with pastries, chatting with the boys before leaving. No one avoided anyone anymore. No shadows lingered in their eyes. The world, at last, had stopped asking them to take sides. The house Kyle was building wasn't large, a single-story home with slanted roofs and glass walls overlooking the water. He called it the house that love built, not for romance, but because it genuinely was built from love, the kind that had weathered ruin, betrayal, forgiveness, and rebirth. One afternoon, as Melissa brought him a glass of water, he studied the plans. "See here," he said, pointing. "The morning light will come from this side straight into the study. Even in late afternoon, it'll still find a way through." She smiled. "And this room?" "Your studio," he said. "It'll open to the lake. No doors, just a curtain of glass." "Why?" "Because I don't ever want light to be trapped again." The words made her fall quiet. She looked at him, this man who had once been broken and was now rebuilding, not just with wood and nails, but with faith. "You've changed," she whispered. He smiled. "No, I just stopped being afraid." That evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun melt into the lake. The boys had fallen asleep in the hammock. Behind them, the glass house glowed with sunset, golden, warm, still. "Do you remember the first day I came to your old house?" Kyle asked. "I do. You asked me what I wanted to build, and you said, I wanted light that could pass through without burning." He laughed softly, eyes glinting. "I think we did it." She leaned against his shoulder. The air was soft, the world quiet. Sometimes, happiness didn't need grand words, only presence, and the shared knowing that they had come far enough to deserve peace finally. On the day the house was finished, the sky was impossibly clear. Maggie came, and so did a few friends, even Kiki, with the boys in tow. Melissa stepped inside the completed home. Light streamed through the glass walls, scattering into rainbow fragments on the wooden floor. She placed a new painting on the table after. 2 hands, clasped together, surrounded by white and soft color. No signature, no text, just connection. "What's it called?" Maggie asked. "After," Melissa replied. "After what?" She smiled. "After everything." Laughter rippled through the house. Kyle came over and took her hand. Sunlight spilled across both their faces. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. They were home. That evening, they held a small gathering on the porch. Kiki brought apple pie, Maggie poured wine, and the boys chased their puppy through the grass. It was simple, warm, real. Kiki sat beside Melissa and said quietly, "I never thought I could sit here without bitterness." Melissa smiled. "And I never thought I'd want to see you again." They both laughed freely, without weight. No apologies were needed, and time had already done the healing. Kyle raised his glass. "To everything we lost and everything we still have." Glasses clinked. The sound rang bright and clean, like crystal in sunlight. As dusk fell, The boys brought lanterns to the porch. Their soft glow danced on the water, scattering across the glass walls like starlight. Melissa watched, eyes wet, but smiling. Kyle wrapped his arm around her and whispered, "Maybe love isn't about starting over. Maybe it's about learning how to keep the light when it returns." She nodded, voice trembling, and knowing that even when it breaks, we're strong enough to piece it back together. Later that night, when everyone had gone and the boys were asleep, Melissa stepped outside. The new house gleamed softly, its reflection stretching across the still lake. It looked like a dream, but it wasn't. It was a dream she'd built, one brushstroke at a time, with truth, with pain, with courage. Kyle came behind her, his arms circling her waist. "When I built this place," he said, "I didn't think about walls or ceilings. I just thought, how do I make sure the light always finds its way in?" "You did it," she whispered. He smiled. "No, we did." They stood there, two imperfect souls in a house built not to hide from light, but to welcome it. A home, honest and alive. The next morning, Melissa woke early. Passing her studio, she saw dawn flooding through the glass, washing the walls in gold. She opened her journal one last time and wrote, "Day 500. I am no longer afraid of light, because light does not burn, it only reveals what's worth keeping." She closed the book and looked out at the water. The lake shimmered, sunlight breaking into 1,000 fragments. Behind her, Kyle slipped his arms around her, and when she turned, they kissed, not as an ending, but as a quiet promise that everything they had endured had been worth it. That day, Seattle was peaceful. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that made you believe in beginnings. On the porch, the painting after caught the morning light, a reminder that true love is never afraid of the cracks, because light only travels through the places that were once broken. And so, the story of Melissa Hall ends not with vows or grandeur, but with a small house filled with sunlight. After 500 days, she had finally learned, love isn't about perfection or permanence. It's about the courage to stay, to trust, and to see each other clearly, truthfully, and whole. If you've remained until this moment, thank you. May you find, somewhere within this story, a reflection of yourself, the part that's been hurt, fractured, but still believes in light after the rain. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay for the next story. Perhaps it will be yours, another soul still learning to find the light.